Notes.
Yeah, notes. Right under the camera.
Yep. So I'm looking at them right now. It's great.
Nice.
And then I'm going to move my pen so I'm not playing with
I
it.
should do that. It's just right there.
Yeah.
And that blocks your face, so it's better.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
Hey guys, this is the 7th episode of the Will and Cody Show. We appreciate you guys listening. Last week we had Kevin Youngblood come on the show. If you haven't heard that one yet, please go listen to that first. That was an amazing interview we had with him. Will, what were your thoughts on that one?
I thought it was great. Let alone just being able to catch up with him and then just get his perspective. I was like looking back on it. We ended up talking about a lot in that one short video. So if you haven't checked that one out, please do. Let us know your thoughts. He's got a lot of wisdom, just in a lot of areas. Every time we talk, and obviously I talk to him a lot, but every time we talk, I always get something out of it. And so that one I thought was really good. Just it's very practical, wisdom, and then just his experience as well. Something that I trust in of okay, this is somebody who's done it. So just learning from that, it was really good. And then it was just fun just to be able to chat and talk with somebody, have kind of the three of us on one call or one recording was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Just to go back and forth.
Dynamic.
Yeah, I think it was. Than just the one-on-one, it's kind of nice throwing somebody else in there and we can ask them questions and get their perspective on stuff. So
we're definitely going to do that again. Definitely with him. Yeah. He wanted to talk some more business stuff.
Yeah,
that's something we really want to get into. So we'll have him back on, and then we'll try to get some other people because I love that dynamic. I think our audience loved it. I got some good feedback. People saying it was great. So we'll do that more often.
Yeah, but it was really good. So I agree. We could do that a little more often. That would be a lot of fun. So something I wanted to mention to you, Cody, this week. So I've been kind of I need to spend more time on there, but on social media and kind of promoting our other platforms. But one thing that I've just seen is a lot of different perspectives on financial, I guess I would say topics or just strategies, I guess would be a good word for it. And so I thought it would be kind of good for us today just to walk through some of those and maybe give our own perspective on what we think. Specifically, I've seen just different mindsets of in finance, we can get really focused on the math part of it. Of, well, this would be mathematically the best approach versus practical, this is what's easiest for me. And I think, I'll just throw out mine. I think there's a balance to be struck with that. Yeah. And so you'll probably hear that in a lot of my, in my thoughts, but people go kind of to the extreme and can say you always go by the math. When do you just follow the math or when do you follow okay, practically this would be the best for me.
Right.
And so there's quite a few different areas, we could get into, but just generally, what do you think about that? And then we can kind of go into specifics if you want, different scenarios. But what are your thoughts in general of math versus some would say psychology or behavior, that part of it as well?
So yeah, I mean, that's the debate of is finance a math problem? And in what you said, I think in some ways it is. I mean, obviously, when you're doing your taxes, right, you want to get the math right. That would be good. And then of course, calculating your investments, see what it's like in the future using investment calculators, things like that. Yeah, definitely, that's math. And I have a math degree, so I'm not a huge fan of math. I know a lot of it, and that's what my degree is, and so I use a lot of it. But to be honest with you, when I make my financial decisions, it's not usually math based, and it's just because we're human, and we don't really make the best decision based off of math. 9 times out of 10 is because we don't do the math, right? But even if we do, sometimes we try to create this perfect scenario where it's and I do it sometimes. I'll be oh, well, if I can come up with $500 a month, then I can save that 500 and then I can be able to afford this, whatever this thing is, or I can invest a certain amount. I'll be honest with you, that never happens. Life kicks you in the butt. And sometimes when we do the math, right, it's a perfect scenario. We don't think about or put in our calculations those outside sources, just risk, things that could happen. And so I think that's a problem that we think about. I know there's people that say, well, debt's okay in certain situations if you use it for investments or building a business, and
Mm.
that may be true. And there's a lot of people that have good success with that, but there's a lot of people that don't, and they'll tell you, the market crashed, or I lost my job, or
Mm.
something happened,
Right.
and at the end of the day, they either went maybe bankrupt or something.
Yeah.
And so, like what you said, I think it's a balance. There's definitely math involved, but
Mm.
half of our decisions are not based off of numbers.
Yeah. So we can go into like specifics. So I want to get your thoughts on this. Like one that's big is like paying off your house early or getting like a shorter mortgage. So say like a 15 versus 30 year. Um, there's a lot of different thoughts, and I don't want to say it's a controversial topic, but there's a lot of different people with different opinions on um, if you do pay it off early. So it's just saying it's just a mental thing of just having that freedom of, okay, the house is taken care of, you're not having to pay the mortgage anymore. You can use that funds now for, whatever you want to put that towards. And it's just the peace of mind of knowing that, okay, my house is done. Sure, you still have taxes and stuff, but you're not having to make a
Hmm.
big, um, mortgage payment every month. And so that's kind of the thought there versus the math approach would say, if you can get a low enough interest rate on your mortgage, then, why would you pay that off instead of just investing the money that you would have, used to pay it off? And then you could get a higher interest rate. So say if you're paying 2 to 3% on your mortgage, you can instead invest. And if you got 8%, then you just made that difference instead of paying off, the mortgage. So that's
Right.
kind of like one of the topics that people look at. So what do you think about that? Those kind of two approaches, which one would you maybe recommend to people, or which one would you take, yourself when you're kind of looking at it?
Right. Well, I mean, for me personally, debt is I don't like it. It's a risk.
Mm.
It's something that I just don't want to be in. When it comes to consumer debt, we talk about we don't want people to be in consumer debt. We don't think it's a good investment in any way.
Yeah.
But a house is a little bit different, and so I'm a huge fan of the 15 year. Just because you pay it off in half the time than a 30 year,
Yeah.
and that way, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, now I have it paid off. There's another 15 years where I'm not throwing that 800 or 1,000 or
Mm.
whatever my mortgage is, and I can put it towards something else like investments. And so to me, I'm thinking a margin. Now you may say, well, in the short term, right, a 30 year is cheaper than a 15 year. And that may be true. But I'm thinking of a long term margin. I'm thinking
Mm.
of, yeah, I may be paying a little bit more now, but like 15 years from now, I
Mm.
own something, which by the way is it's pretty cool. It's not a
Yeah.
great
That's a
investment,
good point.
but you owning
Yeah.
a house is something, right?
Yeah,
That
for
goes
sure.
towards your net worth. And then you've got, you know, whatever it was your mortgage payment
Mm.
minus your taxes and insurance and such, but there it is and you can invest that.
Mm.
And so in my mind, I'm like that seems better. And the reason is one, I don't have to worry about that house payment anymore. You know,
Mm.
if I see myself 15 years down the road, I would much rather not have a house payment. Because if
Mm.
something bad happens, right? Let's say I lose my job or something, and that could happen in the first 15 years. But um, I it'd be nice to be like, I don't have to worry about it because I don't have to pay for my house because I already own it,
Mm.
right? And that would be nice. The thing is, like when bad things happen, your giving stops, your investments stop, everything stops, but the debts. The debts still have to be paid.
You're right. Right.
And so that's my reasoning. But I'm sure that you could calculate some way
Mm.
that you could get a 30 year. Or I mean, I think you were telling me about a 50 year. Like you could get a 50 year, and
Yeah,
somehow
that's
you could
crazy.
get that. I know, right? And then you could get that, and then you could have a good enough margin, invest the difference, and be able to live. And that's probably pretty cheap housing on a
Mhm.
30 year or even a 50 year. You know, but where's the think about the risk in that though? That's everything working out perfectly. And in
Mm.
my mind, that's also stressful. You know,
Mm.
that's 30 years from now, I still have to make a house payment. I don't know what's going to happen in 30 years,
Right.
right? And so anyway, that's my thinking. And I get it, and some people have had success with that. You're just calculating everything. But man, I've done math for so long and it's stressful.
Yeah.
And I would much rather just not have to worry about it.
Oh, that's
So
true. Yeah.
yeah, the
No, I'd
more
say
math I can avoid, the better.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think there's a balance with that because you also have to think like, okay, if you wanted to go purely on math, you'd also just have to look at renting, just straight up, just renting and then investing. Because if there's, for some reason you could find, some renting that's going to be cheaper, then wouldn't that be, the better mathematical? So I think, there's a balance of you have to be practical.
That's true.
I get it, as far as thinking about interest rates. For me, I like being able to focus on only a few things at a time. And, this could be a fault. Sure. You could do more if you've kind of gotten more going on at one time. But I'd say I like just being able to have things taken care of. So okay, I'm working on this, I've got a few things I'm focusing on, but I don't have a ton. So it's not like I'm worried about all these different payments. It's like, in 15 years, my house, I won't really have to worry about it as much. I'm not having to make that payment. And then it frees up, as you mentioned, cash flow. So I think that's a big part of it as well. Another area that, kind of gets discussed as far as, trying to finance something versus paying cash for it. And it's similar to the paying off, your home early approach of, if you could get something with a low interest rate, why would you pay cash for it? Instead, invest the cash and then, just pay off that thing. And, with a lower interest rate. And so what I'd say with that is I think you kind of nailed my perspective as well. I think we think, pretty similar with this is, what happens if something goes wrong? I think that's a big question of what, if you lose your job, you're still going to have to make that, financing payment. That's not a negotiable. Like you're going to have to pay those debts. And so it's one less thing of if something goes wrong that I'm held liable for. I have more options, in my opinion. And you could say, hey, if you get a loan, now you have more options with the cash. Sure. I agree with that. But I prefer to have more options at a worse time than when I'm starting making a decision. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather have, more options later on. And so that's what I think, paying with cash kind of gives you. And then as you mentioned, just stress, having to worry about all these different payments and making sure things are good. I think there's a trade-off. I think your stress and your time is worth money. So, you may be able to get a greater mathematical return, but how much more stress or how much, are you worrying about this? How much time is it taking up? I think you have to think about that as well. Of, if you're worrying about this all the time, then it may not be worth the extra money, that you're able to make from it. So I think you need to consider that as well. And then also I think you made a good point when thinking about our projections of looking at things mathematically, we always leave out the outside forces that could come in and completely destroy our plans. Because I've done with that too, where we always do that investment calculator where we're like, oh, if I invest, this amount and get this return every year, for the next, 40 years, it'll be great. But it's you're not going to get exactly that return every year for 40 years, So it's we have to think about it practically as well. And so I think you have to balance a little bit of that outside risk of, saying, hey, things could go wrong. And so let's plan for that. Yeah. So I want to be okay in the worst case as well as the best case. I don't want to just be okay if everything works out 100%. So at least that's my kind of thinking about it.
Yeah. And nothing ever works out. It's called life, right?
Right.
Nothing ever works out exactly to plan.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where a lot of people get the just come up with, I mean, you can optimize, right? In optimizing, that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But you do have to look at the worst case. And they do this in engineering, science. We did this in college with a lot of physics classes where we're trying to calculate the projection of something, right? From point A to point B. But then, it's in a space vacuum, right? It's perfect, but that never happens. There's air resistance. There's wind. There's outside forces, and so we need to think about that when it comes to our money and our planning. It's
Mm.
like, what happens if
Yeah.
we lose our job? Things like that. And that's why we have things like insurance to help with that. That's why we
Mm.
have an emergency fund, right? But then we still need to be wise with our purchases. And I think, like you
Mm.
were saying, financing, if you want to get into a little bit about like buying a new car versus a used car, buying with cash. I've heard a lot of people make the argument, well, why not, instead of throwing $30,000 down, why don't I just pay, the $400, $500 a month? Well, one, your used car is going to lose its value by 30, 40% once it's off the lot.
Your new car.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, your
Yeah.
new car.
Yeah.
And, in used car, you technically, or usually doesn't as much. But if you think about like, well, I mean, just $500, that's the average car payment. And I'm going on a little rabbit trail here, but
No,
$500 is
you're
the
good.
average car payment. I mean, think about it. What if you just bought like kind of an old Toyota? It's got 150,000 miles on it, right? My wife
Yeah.
and I, she drives a Honda Civic. It's got like 240,000 miles on it. I think still running. And we throw that $500 not into a new car. We'll need something one day, but we have an emergency fund, and throw that into our investments, right?
Right.
And so that's a mindset that I have, and I know some people don't have that. And yeah, you can optimize. Yeah, you can say, well, okay, well, I could get this car and it's only $200, and it's 0 APR financing. But you got to think about what could happen. When you
Mm.
own a car, nobody's going to take it. When you own a car and you've got insurance on it,
Right.
you're good. You got an emergency fund, everything's fine. But if you owe somebody for your car, that payment has to be made no matter what.
Mm.
And I don't think people understand that. And there's these guys called repo men, right? They
Right.
repossess the car when somebody doesn't make their payments on time. And so I think that's some things that people just don't think about. So yeah,
Right.
you can optimize. You can
Yeah.
optimize, but
Yeah.
is that really the best? Do we want the most optimal amount of wealth, or do we want wealth with the least amount of resistance? There's always going to be risk. There's
Right.
always risk, no matter what. You know, if you're investing in the stock market, there's risk, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we want to mitigate as much as we can. And I think by staying out of debt, having the appropriate insurances like we've talked about,
Mm.
investing with diversification, things like that, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can optimize, but is it worth it?
Yeah. And one note I'll put in that we didn't talk about this, but I would say leverage as far as investing, I would not recommend. I've seen people do that. Just for me, it's kind of scary. But thinking about somebody taking out a big loan and then investing it with the thought of, oh, I'm gonna make some money. It's gonna make me a ton of money, and I'm gonna be able to pay this off. Again, it could work. Awesome.
Yeah.
But also, what happens if the investment doesn't turn out and you still owe that money? So, I'd be very wary of using debt as a investment vehicle unless you can have some backing and there's some confidence, that you're going to be able to repay that. But just going completely, uncovered and having nothing, kind of like to be able to take care of that, it can be kind of scary. So I'd say I would not recommend anybody looking at that unless, you probably already have the means to cover that anyway. So just a side note in that, because I do unfortunately know people that, took out large loans to invest and then their investments didn't turn out the way they were hoping. And then now they owe that large amount,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of ruined a lot of things. It's ruined their, their hopes of, investing in the future because they're stuck paying off this loan.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
so I'd be wary of that.
Yeah. When I was advising, I've advised a couple of companies, and this is a business thing, but it relates to personal finance and investments. One company, they had a set amount of cash, but they got a loan, but they had the amount of money for that loan to pay it off if something happened. And I don't really remember the reasoning. They just said something about like they would rather have this small amount of loan. It's like a bridge loan or something like that.
Yeah.
There was some reasonings, and I was like, it's okay because you've got the money to back it up, right? So in that case, it was fine. Another company, they just had a loan. It was a large loan, And they're like, we're going to do payroll with this. We're going to do everything. They didn't have any other money. And that company is no longer in existence today because something happened and it was called COVID. Right.
Right.
And so, it's things like that we have to really just think about. Like there are crazy outside source things that could happen that nobody saw coming.
Yeah.
I mean, we just experienced it last year, right?
Yeah, literally.
I mean, case one. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think, as we think about debt, there's even, this debate of math versus psychology, even in paying off debt. So if you're of the mindset, I would say look at the consumer debt. And then if you even are like, I want to pay off all the rest of my debt, whatever it is, even in the strategies to do that. And I think we've covered this in another video, but that's even a strategy in itself of how do you go about paying off debt? Do you do it mathematically or do you do it, through using psychology or practicality? So the two kind of thoughts there are, one, it's all with mountains and snow. I don't know why we love snow, but one is the Avalanche Method, which is you take your debts and you line them up highest interest rate to lowest interest rate, and then you start paying them off that way. And that makes sense, right? I mean, you think that you want to tackle the one that's hurting you the most as far as interest rate, and so pay that off and then work your way down. Whereas the Snowball Method, and that's the one I think most people might be familiar with, which is you just take it smallest to largest. And so that way you start small, kind of build up momentum, and work your way up to the big debts. Right. And the thought there is, mathematically, the Avalanche Method will get you there faster. It's not by much. I think it's like a month or two. Depends with, what it is and how many payments, obviously, or what your payments look like. But the Snowball Method has a larger percentage of people that make it to completion. So that's kind of the thought, is like, do you want to get there a little bit faster, or do you want a higher chance that you'll actually get there? And so that's kind of the two thoughts. So I think you talked about this, Cody, that you like the Snowball Method a little bit better. Do you want to go into why maybe? And then specifically like comparing it back to the Avalanche, like why would you consider those two? And then why would you pick, the Snowball over that?
Well, yeah, the Avalanche is mathematically the fastest way to pay off debt. There's a formula. I looked at the proof, the mathematical proof for it.
Right.
It's the fastest way. There's no way around that. And so most people say, okay, that's what I'm going to do because debt's bad. I need to get out of it. And I agree. You need to get out of it quick. But I want you to complete it. Right. And so this is the part where we have to think about behavior, and we don't need to be thinking about math per se. So the Dead Snowball is where you pay the smallest one first, right? And that one's usually the cheapest. It's usually it's small, and it's usually doesn't take too long to do, right? It might be like a credit card over at Kohl's or something, or credit card with your bank, or Amazon card or whatever like that. That's usually what it is.
Yeah, it's something small.
It's probably like $500, $1,000, something like that, right? So that one's not too hard. It's pretty quick to pay off. Well, it's kind of a reward system with your brain that you achieve something. And that achievement makes you want to go tackle the next one, right? With the Avalanche, 9 times out of 10, that debt with the highest interest rate is going to take the longest. Not always, but it's going to take the longest. It's going to take a long time to pay it off. And you don't have that reward system, and people get burned out, right? So that's why I prefer the Dead Snowball. Again, I have a math degree, but I would choose the one that follows behavior than math, just because it's proven. Dave Ramsey did a study on it because he's the one that pushes the Dead Snowball big time. Most people pay off their debts, get to completion through the Dead Snowball, and the Avalanche, 9 times out of 10 people just burn out and they give up on the idea.
Yeah, so I think you need to look at that as well. Maybe if you're like this person that's super disciplined, you can stick to stuff for, a few years and be consistent with it. And you have your mindset, that you're going to do it. Then maybe you look at the Avalanche because you're like, I'm going to do it regardless. So might as well do it the fastest way. But I think most of us, we're humans. We can get burnt out pretty easily. We can get tired of stuff. So I want to be, have the highest likelihood that I'll get to my goal. And I think this relates, and people could think I'm wrong, with this, but I think it relates a lot to any really financial goal is, yes, there could be a mathematical way to get a little bit more. So like I could get to my goal a little bit faster. And I love to look into that, how I want to get to a goal faster, but I want to get to the goal, like that's a big thing. Like if I get there or not, I'm going to be really happy. Like, or if I get there either way, I'm going to be happy. So if I get there a month sooner or, a month later, I'm going to be happy that I got there. Sure, it'll be nice. I'll definitely look for ways to get there sooner, to be able to invest more, to hopefully, reach financial independence sooner. Love to do all those things. But I just want to make sure I get there. So don't put that at risk. Be consistent with it. And, a few extra dollars in retirement won't mean as much as, getting there. So I think that's kind of the balance that we have to strive like between those two mentalities. So I like what you said, like, that may be the way, you would recommend looking at it as far as can you get there. But I think, either way, as long as you get there, it'll be good.
Yeah. And that's the end goal, right? You want to get there. Wealth is, it's an interesting topic to look at. What is wealth, right? To me, it's just being able to not worry about money. And then when I get to retirement, not worry about money. That's what I want, right? Kind of not just do whatever I want, but to not have to worry about it, to live my life and not really have to worry about it. And so we have to think, well, how do we get there? And what we talk about is how we get there. Now we can optimize, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love optimization. I read papers on it all the time, but I don't want to risk it, right? And I feel that's what some people are doing. They're risking by optimizing too much to a point where if something happens that they didn't calculate or plan for, then the whole thing comes crumbling down. They got to maybe pull out of their retirement to be able to pay off their house, to stay from a foreclosure or bankruptcy. That's something that could completely ruin your entire, financial future. And so that's something we don't want to risk. So yeah, you can optimize. And I don't want to down people that do that. It's really cool. In the financial world, there's nerds and there's normal people.
Right.
I think like a nerd, but I behave like a normal person.
Right.
Because I don't want to risk it, right?
Yeah.
There are people that can do it and they love it, and that's cool. But for the rest of us, right, we just want to get there. And, I don't want to down those people, but I also want to say, you don't need to be worrying too much. That's the whole goal, is to not have to worry about money, right?
Yeah. No, that's true.
So,
yeah. If the goal is like financial freedom and not, just to have, be able to do whatever you want and not worry about money, then a great step is put things in place that make it so you don't have to worry about money. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? And so, no, I'm with you. I think we think similar with that. I think if you can make it work, you want to be the mathematical person, go for it. You'll get there faster. You'll get a greater return. But if you kind of know yourself and know you're going to get burnt out, or know that you just maybe want one less thing to think about, or, one less thing to juggle, kind of streamline it, then that may be a good route too, simplify things. That can really work out versus getting too complex just to make a little bit more in the end.
Yeah. So. That's why I like to automize my, investments. It automatically comes out of my account. I don't really worry about it. I just have to make sure the money's there. I have to just keep working, doing my job, following my budget. But everything else just kind of falls into place. You have your emergency fund, your debts, you're paying off your debts, or your debts are paid off, things like that. You pay your house. You have a goal to maybe pay it off early if that's what you feel would be best, which we recommend. And that's kind of the mindset that I recommend, just because it is, in my opinion, the most least amount of stress. There's a lot of stress in this world. We have to worry about a lot. I have to worry about work all the time, right? I have to optimize and work.
Right.
I don't want to do all that with my finances. I want to come home and know that everything's going to be all right. And so I just think that kind of mindset is something that people need to consider when trying to set up their finances.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I think we covered that. If you guys have if you're listening, you have any questions, feel free to ask us. If we said anything that you're like, well, that was dumb, okay, you feel free to message us, and we'll maybe answer or restate it a little bit and how we think it. We think, any way you want to go about it, I think would be good. But we also want you to have peace of mind and be comfortable with the plan, even if stuff goes wrong. So if you love the math side of it, go for it. Follow it to a T. But if you're more practical, I'd say you don't feel like you always have to do mathematically the best. I think you should still do stuff enough to get you to your goal. So don't do nothing just because it's easier. So do something, put it in place, something you understand, makes sense, and gets you to your goal. That's the big thing. As long as you get there, absolutely. I think the route doesn't matter, as much. So another thing, Cody, really quick, wanted to talk about is we did have a question come in that I wanted to answer. It's not really related to this topic we're talking about today, but somebody asked, why the 15% towards retirement? How do you determine that 15% number? And then why isn't it different for, if someone's at one age group or the other? So if like somebody's just starting out versus getting close to retirement, if somebody's making a lot or a little, why 15%? And then, why 15% across the board for everybody? And so I don't know if you want to talk about that. I had a few thoughts that I could kind of answer it with, but I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that one.
I haven't really thought much about it. I've just always been like all the books I've read and the
just accepted
people I've
it.
talked to. It was 15%. That's what they told us, right?
Yeah.
To my knowledge, 15% is whatever your income is now. If you invest 15% and you put it into an index fund that's doing roughly like 8-9% yearly, like the S&P 500 or something, then by I think it was like 40 years, 45 years. And don't hold me to the numbers. Then you would be able to retire off a similar income that you had at the time that you were investing. It's a really good goal to have for somebody that's not investing for their, in retirement. So I would say you need to at least do 15%. I'm sure there's math and numbers and reasons that lots of finance gurus say 15%. But I do know, Will, when we were working with the financial advisor during that internship, he recommended 15%. But for some people, he recommended more. It was because they were at a different stage in their life. Maybe they didn't start investing early enough, like at our age, in the mid-20s. Maybe they were in their mid-30s and 40s. And so they really had to play catch up because they didn't have, time in the market on their side anymore.
Yeah.
And so he was talking in rates of like 30 and 40%. But he said it was achievable because, these people usually tend to have their houses paid off and have extra income and stuff like that. And it was cool to listen to how, like, even though you may not be young and you may not have all that time that other people might, you could still retire comfortably. So that was really cool. But 15% is a good goal to have, especially for people that are just starting. But depending on where you are in life, definitely may need more. I wouldn't recommend any less, unless you're just making a lot of money and then you want to retire on like not a lot of money.
Right.
But I wouldn't recommend any less than 15%.
Yeah. I think it's a good rule of thumb. Like it's a good, just like standard, like, about that will be good, regardless.
Right.
I think you can adjust it. I would say a good approach if you want to. There's some good retirement calculators out there where you can calculate like about how much you would need in retirement, to retire. And when I say retire, it may not even be just like we say retirement, stop working. It may one of my goals is, to retire a little bit early so I could just do what I want. If I want to work a job, doing whatever, it doesn't matter what I make, I could just do it. So, that could be a good goal as well. Just a little side note of that. But look up, kind of what stuff you might want to do, if you want to keep working and just do what you want, if you want to give away your time and just kind of work on different projects, whatever you want to do and for how long, you can kind of come up with a round number, kind of idea of how much you'll need. And then you could just, a lot of these same retirement calculators will show, okay, how old are you now? Here's how much you'd have to put in, assuming this rate of return. and you kind of get an idea of like, oh, that's a little more than 15%, or that's actually a little less. And then going back to, kind of the idea that we talked about earlier of like doing the math on it, I think 15% is a good, average. And I think, or a good goal. I think you said that well. I don't know if I'd recommend less than that, because I'd always rather have more and not need it, than come out and, as we said, be worrying about it because I tried to optimize it by not putting in as much in and thinking that I'm gonna still get to my goal. So I think that's a good, good base goal, 15%. And then I'd put money into other stuff. So if you're just starting out, I'd say 15% is a good place for really a long time. Like if you do the math on it and you assume that as someone gets, older and it stays in their career, they might be making more. So that 15% is then more. You can catch up pretty quick. I mean, it's not going to be as much as somebody who's starting out, at 20 doing a lot at 50%, but you can still catch up, at 15%. But I think if you're, you are getting closer to retirement, it will probably be more than 15%. I'm just going to say it's, in order to get to whatever your number is that you want to hit, it probably will take more than 15%. But I think for most people, 15% is about what you need. And there's a lot of math behind that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were going to say something.
Oh, no, you're good. I was going to say that it's what most financial gurus like Dave Ramsey and others, they say 15% of your before taxed income. That's what your salary is. So some people say, well, actually, post-tax is okay. That might be true. I don't know. And that's going to be for individual people. So like William said, go put it in a calculator or go talk to a financial advisor and kind of just see what you need. For me, it is pre-taxed. So I need to invest 15% of my salary, not post-tax. But that could be different for anybody. Yeah,
that's another good thought. So I think if you take anything away, I think, everything can be, every individual case is different. So I'd say 15% is a good standard goal, but it may not be the same for everybody. So definitely look at that. I'd recommend at least 15%, as you mentioned, Cody. But look into it. See what kind of numbers come through. Because you may need to put a little bit more. Honestly, that if you're getting a little closer to retirement, that'll probably be a practical thing that you're just going to have to put more in.
Yeah.
I know people that in that same kind of boat where they kind of got control of their money later in life. And so they had to really catch up and they had to put a lot, away to be able to do that, but they were able to. So I'd say, don't take it for granted, do some math. I think it's definitely not one size fits all. Every person's case is different. Depends on what your goals are. What do you want to do? But look into it. But that's kind of why we chose 15%. Is it's pretty standard for everybody that if you do 15%, you should be good. But every case will be, different.
Yeah.
And that's
eventually, you're going to want to talk to a financial advisor. We always recommend that. And we might do a podcast one day about like how to find a good financial advisor, when is a good time, things like that. So that's something I would definitely recommend because they're going to be able to tell you they've got better calculators than, Investopedia or whatever it is.com. And they're going to be able to better see what your situation is and find out what's best for you. But yes, 15% is a good rule of thumb, but down the road, you may need to up that a good bit. So
yeah, it may not be an advisor, I'll say, or just a good mentor, or find some good knowledge resources that you can go to. Because that may not, I don't know, that may not be a fit for everybody, but at least find, some different resources on, what can I kind of plan for? How much should I put away? And, you can kind of tailor it to your needs. But, we can't speak to every need. So that's why we say 15%, because I think most people that'll be good.
Mm-hmm. That's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're about at 40 minutes, so I think we'll wrap it up. But I've enjoyed these podcasts. I'm being honest with you.
Nice.
I like it. It's a good change of pace. So we're going to keep doing this. if you guys enjoy it, please let us know. If you've got any questions, you can hit us up on social media. It's Ask Will and Cody, at Ask Will and Cody on Twitter, and it's just at Will and Cody on Instagram, or just wherever you're finding this, just comment. We're on YouTube and Spotify and just all the good stuff. So, but we do appreciate you guys listening. If you have any questions, please go to our website, www.willandcody.com. We also got a nice blog there. You can check that out, read a little bit more. But go there, ask us some questions. We'll answer them on the podcast, and we may, if you want to be featured on here, we might just have you on here. So anyway, so we really appreciate you guys listening, and we will see you next time.